So one sees that as a recipient of money from philanthropists, there are certain games one needs to play or certain things one needs to take into account of. This is from philanthropy, not from CSR. And one is that you have to be conscious that the donor's profile has to be maintained in this thing, and probably more than your own profile as a recipient. Uh, and this to us old guys who were in small NGOs ourselves, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever it was, I think 1990 or something, 30 years ago, that we would say, why the hell should we build up ActionAid's profile? We are doing the work, you're just giving us the money. It's just, that's all you're doing. But now people are very, very conscious about it, that you should not outshine your donor and so on. Give credit, let them shine, and take part in these beauty competitions, and this prize and that prize, and so on and so forth, which are but I think other than that, there are three things that are important for you if you work with philanthropists. And the first is that many of them now talk results-based frameworks, that you have to worry less about outputs and more about outcomes. Sorry? Oh. So to worry more less.
Ignore that.
Yeah. Worry less about outputs, worry more about outcomes. Are you achieving your objectives? To what extent are you achieving your objectives? And that, to us old timers, has positives and negatives, because knowing what your objectives are is very important, and working towards achieving your objectives is very important. But sometimes, many of your objectives are not possible to put onto paper, or they're not easily measurable, or they're conflicting. Most of us who know the chaos of work on the ground know that your objectives are not usually clean and clear and distinct and that sort of thing. They're chaotic. Some compete with each other, some conflict with each other, some are part of each other, and so on. And there's a certain chaos to things. Some are unwritten and unsaid, but are there. It's not easy to be set up frameworks like the results-based framework, or these nice logical frameworks that sort of assume that each objective, activities, outputs, outcomes, impacts, measure units of measurement. This is nice boxes and that sort of stuff. Do not reflect the clarity of real world. But we have to. But some things that also can't be measured, and that's a huge problem, because some important things, especially relating to governance and so on, can't be measured, and therefore, do they move off the agenda? Is working on gender-based violence, for example, wife beating at home, we're beating up wives at home, which happens across villages, across the country, I can assure you, in large quantities. Now, this is something that you can't put a results-based framework to, in terms of objectives, indicators, outcomes. So many houses are beating only 5 times a month instead of 10 times a month. Oh wow, we are, that sort of. It doesn't work according to it. So certain things don't work like that, and usually governance issues don't work. Another example found is gender training to police. How do you know whether they've managed FIRs better and treat women better in the aftermath? But it's good for its own thing. It's important for its own purpose. So be careful on this. And the problem with results-based frameworks is a disease which is called obsessive measurement disorder. That you only work on things that you can measure, and and things that you can't measure or a little more nebulous move off the agenda, and that's usually gender-based violence, gender training, putting lights in houses or outside on common areas, so where girls are usually harassed in villages, putting a light there, and things that don't happen because you've done the initiative. So that's the first thing that I would be a little careful about. The other thing is, fix your governance systems. Nobody likes this issue of one person who's lord and emperor and owner of the organization, and what those old type organizations where this one person could decide what they want to do. And people like good governance, clean governance, boards that function, paperwork that happens, systems and processes, account systems, computerization, etc., etc. And the third is this issue of accountability, that you need to work out where you're accountable, how you're accountable. And if you're accountable to communities, see that it's not just a word, that there are systems for being accountable to communities as well. So this is broadly at Tata itself, our CSR is company driven. It's not. It's for the interests of the company. Usually, it's around where the company is operational, in areas where the company is operational. Some companies have a clear place of operation. I mean, how much time do I have more? 5 minutes?
You have 10, 9.
Okay, 9. So CSR is a little different in that companies have their own interests, their own inclinations, their own requirements, and the CSR money is spent according to that, and it's not according to other things and so on. So you'll find that most companies will spend in their areas of interest, and some of it may be very strategic, some of it may not. And we usually in Tata we say we have something called an 80-20 rule. You know that 80% of your CSR should be sent strategically as per long-term plans and that sort of stuff. 20% should be because of this requirement has come up and this MLA has said something and this, that, and the other and so on. But so you should have the flexibility to meet requirements as they arise. You should also have the ability to work long-term and so on. But in your areas of, because these are the places where you are disturbing people, you have your impacts in other ways, negative and positive and so on. So for example, Tata Steel will do its CSR only in Odisha and Jharkhand and little in Chhattisgarh, because this is where they have impact. This is where in the villages, they've got their trucks running up and down 24 hours a day, extracting coal, etc., etc. This is where they have their operation. This is where they have their effect on communities. This is where they need to do something back. Somebody like TCS, not so much, because their computer companies usually don't have impact on communities around you. So they can have a more all India perspective and that sort of thing. But so CSR is a bit like that, but it is the company's interest that is involved. And at Tata, we try to see that it meets 10 qualities, and these qualities are, I mean, for those with an interest, I can share what these qualities are at some other time. It will be a little long if I go into these qualities. But broadly, I just like to say that at Tata, we try to, we have something which we say it's the correct thing to do, and that is beyond the measurement and the obvious and so on. That something should be done because it's the right thing to do. And I came across a reading recently, Immanuel Kant, on categorical imperatives. That sort of tried to put this, that what does it mean, this right thing to do? And he said there are two conditions it should mean. One is that it shouldn't be something that benefits the primary stakeholders, like the company or the people doing it, or it should be something for a broader benefit. And two, that if everybody did the same thing, the world would be a better place. So that's what, and at Tata, that's important, that we do things because they're the right thing to do. That and therefore we try, not only in our CSR, but in other things, that this is surprisingly important to us. Let me just quickly go to these questions that Amir had, that what do we look for and how do we identify organizations? In CSR, each company has its own policies on this. The ones that have just, and usually Tata Steel, which has a 300+ crore CSR budget, looks very differently at CSR to how, say, a smaller Tata, a smaller company, Tata Realty, for example, which spends about 50 lakhs to 1 crore. So strategically, they look completely different. Not all of them are the same, and so on. Steel will be, you'll find a lot of budgets and confluence with their broad objectives and that sort of stuff. In some places, you'll find probably that the MD's wife has met somebody in a cocktail party, and some arrangement has come up, she liked, and there was some impressed this thing, and therefore let's make. So the smaller ones, they work differently. Larger ones, it works differently. But broadly, we do the correct thing. We look for quality. We look for where our business is having its impacts. These things. We look for not only where we spend, but also where where our volunteers are working, can volunteer as well in this. We look for solving, looking at problems that are real problems, not just in your problem, but actually, which have a larger perspective and that sort of stuff. So there are a whole lot of things that we look for. But just to say that a CSR grant is very different from how philanthropy looks at making grants. And as a recipient, you need to understand the difference between this. These things. CSR doesn't look so much for governance systems of an organization. We know that it's for a 1 year. you're never going to be able to run away with our money and survive and that sort of stuff. But when you have a 4 to 5 year relationship, it becomes much more important that the governance is correct and so on. So I leave it at that. I look forward to the questions so that we can take the dialogue and areas that I have sort of lightly touched upon, but I'm happy to go into much more detail if there's a possibility and interest and so on. I'll leave it at that. Just broadly, that there's something called CSR, there's something called philanthropy. These two things don't really meet, except that they both meet a need for the funding requirements of NGOs that need to do something about societal problems. But as a recipient, you need to look at these two streams completely differently and understand their requirements in very different ways. That's mainly what I have to say at this stage. Thank you so much.